Hi everyone, this is JC. Today I have a special bonus episode. This week I had the chance to speak with Kelly Sinacola from Element 451 at the AI Engage Summit. We talked about one important topic, how to make campus data work for AI, specifically for Agentic AI. In this session, our focus was simple but critical. Agentic AI cannot work without the right data foundation. The core challenge on campuses today is clear. Data lives in many different systems. It is disconnected, slow to access, and hard to trust. Because of this, automation stays limited, and AI cannot act with confidence. We discussed the shift that is needed, moving towards a unified data and intelligent orchestration. This is what gives AI agents real context. The context to understand students, the context to take action, and the context to deliver meaningful outcomes, not just responses. This conversation is an important reminder that the promise of AI only becomes real when campus data works together so that AI can truly help institutions and students succeed. Let's get into it.
So the hard truth that we really want to talk about today is really AI is only as good as the data context it has access to. And that's the most important part. All of your AI tools, you can be using the best LLMs on the market, but until you have good data to build context around, it's all just noise. And I think we've seen that in the news. We've seen that in different stories. We've seen how you can't glue cheese onto the pizza, right? So we want to make sure that we're building that good contextual layer as well. Because unfortunately, in higher ed, as we all know, there's data literally everywhere. It's in spreadsheets, it's in different systems across campus, and we need the right data connected at the right way at the right time in order to make all of this work.
Let us know in the chat if this is nuance or we kind of knew that, right? But as we see your thoughts, the technology and the advancement of technology is not the problem. The technology is far ahead of where these situations that we're going to be talking about today and unpacking how we feel them. Practice is the other issue, right? When we think about the practice, how we use it is the other issue, right? But the conversation today is if the promise of AI is only unlocked to the case of data, specifically the context of the data, how do we start building our campus that is designed to thrive? Linking to the prior conversation, or to the prior slide, Kelly, it's how do we go from promise to reality, knowing that this is probably the biggest unlock. We have been talking so much about agentic in the past 48 hours. And for those of you who may be just tuning in, for those of you who may be listening to this in the podcast, because we're going to be showcasing this in the Higher Intelligence podcast, we want you to make sure that you understand the distinction of the AI that we're talking about. Yes, there's a wonderful AI that is generative AI that kind of feels experience, like, these kind of graphics that you see here of any type of human, the versions of drawings that Brendan has been doing. Many of us have experienced recipes and build up to that. There's a really important distinction that Kelly and I want to bring up, that agentic AI and what it means to campus through the lens of 4 prongs. This type of AI, agentic, has a goal. It knows that what you want, it's to basically speak to an executive. In my case, it knows that everything I'm going to need to do, how do I give you the one pager, right? He knows that you're trying to bring a student to an event. He knows that you're trying to get the student to attend a consultation. It has a goal. Context and memory, it's probably where we're going to spend the most time, but this idea that it uses data to understand what matters to you. And that window of observation keeps on going larger and larger over time. We know that AI has ingested all the books there is, all the internet there is. And in our personal lives, Kelly, it means that it could remember weeks, months of the interaction. Actions means that it knows how to activate on something. Hey, you need an email. You need your nudge should be a phone call. Hey, your email based on the context and the goals should be planned that way, should be delivered that way. And the last one is the idea of plans. Making decisions, adapting and reasoning that this is the better execution for JC versus Kelly is really where it's at. So Kelly, this is kind of what makes agentic AI agentic. Anything for you to add as we move forward in our conversation?
Yeah, and I think when you're thinking of agentic AI too, it's important to think about it as a system of action. So we've had lots of filing cabinets on campus that really that's what our SIS is designed to do. So if I say hello, Johnny instead of JC, and I'm doing your diploma or something, that matters in that moment, at the moment of graduation. But if I'm trying to get JC to do something, to
Mhm.
schedule an appointment, to work towards improving their grades, right? We need our system of action to have that data as of the minute we're trying to make that engagement happen. So applying that layer of action and activity onto our sort of stagnant systems that they tend to be in higher education, it's important that it's always up to date and has that context built in.
Kelly, you spent, not gonna age you, but it's like 55 years at least in
At
consultancy.
least feels like
um,
it.
and and you've been at the interplay between these three systems, the CRM, I'm sorry, the SIS and the LMS. Why does this matter? And I think one of the reasons that I've heard you explain before is there's a new way how these systems operate. And the promise of AI, it's kind of linked to these systems triangulating or orchestrating. But you have a really interesting story of how that's being felt. So,
Yeah, so if you guys have been on calls with me before, you may have heard this story. So let me know if you've heard this one before. But I tend to use my own personal experience. So as JC mentioned, I was in consulting. I used to call consulting years like dog years. So yes, I was around that for a long time. But
well,
my first
55 years apparently.
55 years at least. That's why my caricature looks so good. But my first job in higher ed was at my alma mater. And my first semester in school, I was getting those pings that we try and do now for early alerts, where my grades were dropping to the point where I was going to fall out of eligibility for my scholarship. And so my advisor is reaching out, and we sit down, and I have my very first meeting with that advisor, and he didn't have context. He just saw a freshman student grade dropping. So he said, "Okay,
Mhm.
Kelly, it's very apparent to me that you've just been out partying too much." And for those of you in the audience that know me, for my colleagues that know me, that's not exactly what I was out there doing. What I was doing was adjusting to my new life as a freshman undergrad, previously coming from in as a homeschooler. So I wasn't even used to a classroom environment. I wasn't used to, sitting in class for 7 hours a day. That was new to me. I was balancing campus life and campus work. I was a work study student, trying to make sure I could pay the bills for my tuition. So, lacking context in that conversation, which they would have today using Element 451 or other platforms, it made that conversation awkward for me as a freshman. I am still friends with that advisor today. He's a close friend and faculty member at a private university, but it's that context that matters. So, not knowing that I was the daughter of a military family, a homeschooling student, all of those pieces would have just made that conversation a lot better and his engagement out to me a lot more impactful as well.
And then let's generalize this with the ultimate play here is that if Kelly, young Kelly, forever young Kelly, needed an intervention, many years ago, the LMS would have been automated to send a signal to the CRM, like, come see me, right? And maybe that happened after your midterm.
Mhm.
7 weeks in, the intervention is assigned. And I'm sorry that in your case, your counselor didn't connect the dots and didn't know how to use the context. But what we're talking about today is that the orchestration that is needed and the possibility after this orchestration is enacted, it's that the LMS can start sending in week 3 attendance anomalies on young Kelly that now it's connected to a type of change in the messages that you're sending because the pressure is being felt on the way you write and things of that sort. So the anomaly, it's felt. The interaction or the intervention is launched on week 3. We don't have to wait for week 7 after you basically bomb your midterms or whatnot. So how do we start building this layer? There's 3 things, Kelly, that as we talk about all the possible things that can go wrong, um, where we see constantly these 3 dominate 80, 90% of the challenges. Obviously, we can find edge cases that dominate it, but through the lens of a student journey, delayed in conflict data or reactive operations, this is where the big challenge is for you to use your data for next level becoming a agentic campus unfold? Let's take it one at a time, Kelly.
Yeah.
Incomplete student journeys. What do you see here?
So when I see this, I'm also reminded of a story from my consulting days, one of those 55 years of consulting. And their student journeys were actually documented. You know those old black and white notebooks, JC? Um,
Hmm.
this office had just stacks and stacks of them.
Yeah.
Um, there you go. That black and
Well,
white composition notebook. Theirs
it's an
wasn't
iPad
an
actually.
iPad, though. They were a little less technical than UJC, but that is what stored their student journeys. Every advising meeting, every financial aid meeting, they were a one-stop shop campus, but everything
Yeah.
was kept and stored and tracked in those composition notebooks. So when we were talking about implementing a CRM on campus, they were like, okay, well, how can I integrate all of these composition notebooks into the new CRM? And they were just missing steps along that student journey because they didn't have them documented or stored. And I see that in campuses too, just when they have disconnected systems on campus. It doesn't have to be lack of technology using a composition notebook. But if your systems aren't talking to each other and building that context, you don't know what step that the student is on their journey. And so that's a really techie, nerdy type of example. But they were lacking technology, and it did that disconnection, the incomplete student journeys along the way.
And this is real. We know how difficult it is to have a financial aid system speaking to the restaurant's life system, right?
Mhm.
But that is the complete journey, right? And understanding also that the students don't have a linear journey. They actually have non-linear journeys. So some of them will follow a path that we all recognize as traditional. Some of them may not have it. It's a difficult challenge to solve. That's why it's a core challenge. But the reality is that when these journeys are disparate or disconnected, AI will not thrive. So to
Mhm.
become a next level, start creating this breaking the silos type of mindset. Speaking of breaking silos, delay data and conflict data. Oh my gosh, probably have a million stories on your IT consulting background, Kelly. But where does your mind go with this?
Unfortunately, lots of stories there, right?
Hmm.
Especially in these legacy SIS systems that we work in every day. So with some, I know I've been on campuses where they're like, well, we can only run a batch process export one time a day. And that's just because of system resources, budget, all types of things that are preventing it from being more real time. So not only is there a silo with that data, but also a technology gap where they aren't resourced, they can't, it's going to bring down the system if we run it 8 times a day. So that's a big problem because then your data is conflicting. I know the reason I went into consulting originally was because being on campus, I would walk into a meeting and someone would be like, you have 23 students. No, you have
Yeah.
25 students. Oh, you have 23 students. And meetings would just, instead of focusing on we need to increase enrollment, the meetings just devolved into, but why, where are those two students that we have in discrepancy in the report? And that didn't move any of us forward. So not only could AI not leverage that data, but also it also disrupts really what we should be talking about on campus.
Yeah. Speaking of what we talk on campus, there's a direct correlation with how we run the business and the data that we collect, or we run the business because of the data that we collect and how we collect it, whether it's conflicted or incomplete in terms of journeys. But this shows itself, Kelly and everybody, through the lens of reactive operations. Many of us have been replicating the way we do counseling and admissions, student success, through the lens of I just, I have a one-to-one relationship and how do I get the one student to do those type of things. Reactive operations, it's a crisis, if you will, that as we start orchestrating, the art of the possible unfolds. I only know how to talk to my freshman class, right?
Mhm.
And a counselor is trained to do that. The next level is that not only you can do your freshman class, but you can do it all together through agentic layers, and you can actually start stretching that significantly. This is how operations start moving in a totally different way. Reacting through the lens of the data versus a new layer of operational design or orchestration is kind of where he's at. And Kelly, anything from you on that side?
If- I mean, unfortunately, that's where we sometimes get that AI is hype narrative, right? It's not that the tools are wrong, it's that there's
Yeah,
no concept of how all of these data issues can really be resolved, especially
yeah,
at scale.
correct. There's a question here from Richa. So, can AI, Agentic AI, help us with student advisement? And the answer is yes, right? And as we've been painting the picture, um, there is this aspect of the advisement.
Hmm.
It's a two motion act, three motion act, actually, at least. I'm going to be very crude. Detecting that the student needs an advice. AI and agentic AI, it's far superior than us humans in creating patterns and being consistent on the pattern. Connecting all these paired systems, we're going to come and talk about it to understand Kelly needs help. Number two, to get Kelly to show up requires a gigantic logistical deployment of here's the appointment, come see me, and it's going to be online, it's going to be in person, it's a phone call. The logistics of getting Kelly to come and do it are highly, highly, highly um, uh, uh, delegatable. Is that a word, Kelly? Can you delegate
Sure.
them? So,
Yeah.
and this is where AI thrives. And you know the reason why I say that? So that the third option, we humans doing the high touch intervention, that's kind of where it's at. So you don't spend the time getting the student to advisement, you actually advise the student. So I appreciate the question, and I just want to make the framing of at least how I see this next generation impacting campuses. A recruiter, it's actually doing recruitment. An advisor is actually doing advisement as opposed to the the amount of work spent getting us there. Anyway, I
Mhm.
digress.
And
Kelly,
Ty's point
oh, go
yesterday,
ahead.
right? More time for hugs.
More
To
time for
echo
hugs.
Ty's point from yesterday.
That's right. Talk to me about this unified foundation through the motions of there has to be a unified student profile, real-time events, built-in governance, and an agent-ready design. And you know what would be fun? Put on your data nerdy IT hat, and let me do it through the sense of the functional user. I don't know, admissions counselor, those type of things. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
I wear that nerd hat all day, every day, JC. So I'm prepared.
All right, go for it.
So, well, let's start with you. So, unified student profiles, a single source of truth. We know that we don't have that today. To echo Paula's comment from the chat, one of her colleagues used to work for the FBI. When they mapped out all of their systems, they expressed that the number of systems used was more than the FBI used. Funny, not funny.
Wow.
So, that makes that unified student profile seem like a really big, unachievable goal when we put it in that context.
The the part that the budgets are real. So all of a sudden,
Mhm.
what I get the system based on my budget, and I'm on a mission, so my system does admissions. The part that you need to start looking at to stretch is that, oh my gosh, this system I can stretch to the student life cycle. One of the things that we're trying to do at Element is all the wins that we have had over the years on recruiting students have moved to student success. And how we think about academic affairs, how we think about alumni relations, how we're starting to think about career management, all those things can start navigating. So not only the unified aspect is on you, but your vendor could help you get there.
Mhm. Absolutely. So,
Real-time events.
real-time events, which in my nerd brain, of course, just reads out API to me, right? So having an event-driven architecture that captures events as they happen, not through nightly batch processes. And that really was what
Yeah.
most of my IT career before this life was around, JC, was a bunch of flat file uploads back and forth. So I think in higher ed, we're just moving into this more real-time event architecture, which is opening up,
Mm.
unlocking, leveling us up so that we can build this type of context that AI can live on top of.
Yes. Uh, Friends and everybody listening, if the conversation of your technology provider, whether it's internal or external, it's that they're not connected to the pipelines via an API, your deployment of AI readiness and AI feasibility will drop. Let me
Mhm.
say that again. If you don't have an API connector, your AI will not perform at its true potential. So be very mindful of partners or deployments. It's like, we're going to batch this.
Mhm.
Every day is going to send a flat file and it's going to be sync. You're missing out on all the wonderful things that we've been talking about. Speaking of missing out, governance. This one could be a whole section in itself. What do you think about governance, Kelly?
Speaking for my IT friends in the room, governance is not just an IT only problem. I said that yesterday in my panel. I'll say that again today. I know that my friend Lynn is on here and she will say preach from the chat. Um, so
Hmm.
privacy, security, and compliance, I really do believe in breaking this down into silos so that everyone can focus on layering in that governance. Now that can mean built-in rules. So I was on a call yesterday with a client and we were talking about just writing data to Banner and the rules
Hmm.
necessary to write that to Banner to make sure that we aren't going to have downstream issues later on. But, we have to take that piece by piece and it also means breaking down those silos and talking with all of the downstream resources too that will use that data coming up. And I've unclogged lots of problems with that in consulting as well.
It's a hard problem to solve, and I think this is where, from a functional user, governance sits at a higher level. So push, and from a bottom up, you have the technology. You're in a nation's office. You're a recruiter. You're in different units. Where is my governance? And what are my guardrails on AI? Stay on that lane, and it would force organization to kind of come and get there. Kelly, we have an interesting question, but go ahead and do your the agent ready design. And we have a really interesting question from Harlan.
Yeah, so agent ready design. I do want to say start with something small. We're going to get into this in some of the other slides
Yeah.
as well, but making sure that the agent in use case you're developing to support has the context and just take that into chunks. Everybody's life is a little bit easier when we're working in manageable pieces.
Yeah. Um, Let me go faster here. And Harlan, we'll take your question on the next slide because I think it's super important to
Mhm.
the aspect of how do these systems kind of really handling, LMS information. Um, when we think through the lens of where this is going, API and flat file integration is probably something you already have in your repertoire. And even as a director of student affairs, you may know about these things. Your systems connect this way. But if your systems are not starting to do this type of feasibility when it comes to access to data, that it has a MCP, a model context protocol that allows an frontier model or a modern AI solution to connect with other systems that if now is doing real-time event architecture, semantic layering, context propagation, feedback loops, and continuous learning, your technology and the way you're ingesting data is not moving into the next phase. And one thing that is really important, these are not just technical names that tells you how you batching is done processingly, differently, or how semantic and context data kind of removes the friction, or how the propagation of a student journey now it gets interconnected. It's that, to Kelly's point, that these silos, this is the easiest way, or probably the path of least resistance, to break those silos, because technology is allowing us to basically move away from how to do it, and rather this is basically how technology helps you get there faster. Kelly, anything on this slide?
Yeah, I do have to chime in that this is very super geeky stuff. So if you're not in IT, make sure you ask your IT team, are you working against these five types, right? Make sure that this is part of the AI strategy that you're employing on campus and make sure you're looking at everything because this is a quickly evolving piece of it.
So let's wrap it up with takeaways. I see Brent, how are we doing time? You just showed up with your beautiful face. How much time do we have?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. So we're
Mhm.
gonna come and wrap it up. And I'll wrap it up with Harlan's example, right? Which is,
Yeah.
so how do we take on these, items of discussions, assignments, quizzes? And basically, what I can leave you with is either you're doing it from start, right, or advanced. There's an aspect of orchestrating and building in two ways. Take on only one of them, Harlem, and everybody. Take on things that maybe are tool oriented, and build on that. Win that fight and go to the next one. That's how you start kind of going horizontal. You can go vertical by saying, I just grabbed the assignments. So now let me grab within the assignments. I'm going to start thinking about the time of submission, the actual assignments that are super good versus bad. So going vertical and going deeper is also a possibility. Kelly, I'll let you close.
start in baby steps. That's really important. Make sure that you have a use case that is scoped and timed and that you can build some success around, because the great thing about any of these projects is it takes off like wildfire. You're going to start small and be able to build and grow from there.
Thanks for listening to Higher Intelligence. This show is part of the Enrollify network, home to the largest collection of podcasts in higher education. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. You can find more podcasts, webinars, videos, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe to get new content sent directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the AI agent platform for higher education. Learn more at element451.com.